When America's most secure server was breached, it triggered the earthquake. The silent alarm didn't go to the Pentagon. It went to the old man sweeping floors on the base. The Vanguard Training Center prided itself on forging the future of warfare, a high-tech crucible where America's finest were honed. But last Tuesday, its digital fortress was shattered. A single encrypted file, codenamed Oracle, vanished from a server that, on paper, didn't exist. The breach was silent, surgical, and utterly baffling to the nation's top cyber warfare experts. What they didn't know was that the digital theft had tripped a long-dormant analog wire, a ghost protocol that hadn't been activated in 50 years. To the elite recruits on the firing line, he was just old E. Elias Vance was a fixture, as much a part of the landscape as the dusty Georgia pines surrounding the base. They saw the deep-set lines etched into his face, the slight, shuffling gait, and the gentle tremor in his hands as he swept spent brass casings into a dustpan. They saw a relic, a piece of living history perhaps, but history nonetheless, something to be regarded with a kind of gentle, dismissive pity. "Mind your back, Pops," a young private would call out, jogging past without a second glance. "Mr. Vance, you missed a spot by locker 3. Lieutenant K. Jennings, a man whose ambition was as sharp as a jawline, would announce, his tone laced with impatience. Elias would simply nod, a quiet, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, and shuffle over to correct the supposed mistake. He rarely spoke, content to watch and work. But his work was a language few could decipher. When he cleaned an M4 rifle, he wasn't just wiping away carbon residue. His gnarled fingers, which looked clumsy to the young soldiers, would trace the weapon's lines with a diagnostic intimacy. He could feel a hairline fracture in a firing pin the armorer had missed, or the subtle warp in a barrel that would send a round a fraction of an inch wide at 300 meters. His movements, seemingly slow and feeble, were a masterclass in economy. Each motion honed by a lifetime they couldn't possibly imagine. Sergeant Major Rex, a man carved from granite and 30 years of service, was observing the new training cycle. His eyes, missing nothing, drifted past the recruits, past the bellowing drill instructors, and settled on the old man picking up brass. He watched Elias bend down. It wasn't the slow, pained creak of old age. It was a fluid, balanced motion, a perfect paratrooper's crouch that conserved energy and kept his center of gravity low. Rex's eyebrow twitched. Odd. He filed the observation away, a small anomaly in a world built on rigid conformity. The next day, Sergeant Major Rex began to watch Elias not as a janitor, but as a puzzle. In the armory, he observed as Elias disassembled an M4 with a practiced ease that bordered on artistry. His hands moved with a preternatural grace, feeling for imperfections, testing the tension of springs, his touch a silent conversation with the machine. He was a physician diagnosing a patient, his weathered fingers reading stories in the steel that a manual could never tell. Later, on the range, a recruit fumbled a magazine change, his hands clumsy with nerves. A drill instructor descended upon him, unleashing a torrent of creative insults. From 20 yards away, Rex heard the old janitor mutter something under his breath, so quiet it was almost lost on the wind. Steady heart, steady hand. It was a common enough saying in the special operations community, but the cadence, the specific rhythmic whisper, felt ancient. It was a ghost on the airwaves. Rex's head snapped toward Elias. He looked closer, his expert eyes scanning for details, and then he saw it. It wasn't a fancy watch, but a simple, worn nylon strap on Elias's arm. The watch face itself was strapped to the inside of his wrist, protected, hidden, a simple, practical measure to prevent the sun from glinting off the crystal and giving away a sniper's position. It was a signature. The signature of a unit that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, the Sentinels. That evening, the armory was silent save for the rhythmic slide of a cleaning rod down a rifle barrel. Sergeant Major Rex entered, his boots making no sound on the concrete floor. Elias didn't look up from the receiver, he was meticulously wiping down. He sat on a low stool, the very picture of harmlessness. Rex stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tight. "That phrase you used on a range. And the watch. I've only seen one unit wear their watch on the inside of the wrist like that. I thought they were all gone." Elias didn't stop his work, but for a fraction of a second his hands paused. It was an infinitesimal hesitation, a skipped heartbeat in the rhythm of his work. Then he resumed, but the motion had changed. It was no longer the careful work of an old man. His hands became a blur of practiced, impossible efficiency. The bolt carrier group, the trigger assembly, the charging handle. He reassembled the core of the rifle by touch alone, his eyes finally lifting to lock onto Rex's. The gentle, vacant look was gone, replaced by an intensity that made the decorated sergeant major feel like a raw recruit. Elias's hand slid across the workbench and pushed a single, heavy object toward Rex. It wasn't a bullet. It was a challenge coin, worn smooth with time, bearing the faded engraving of a lone, vigilant sentinel. He tapped it once with his index finger, the sound a sharp crack in the silence. It wasn't a threat. It was a confirmation and a command to stay silent. Sergeant Major Rex walked out of the armory, a changed man. The next morning, he was seen speaking urgently on a secure phone line, his back to the wall, his voice a low, frantic murmur. An hour later, he was in the office of the base commander, Colonel Davenport, a polished officer who saw his command at Vanguard as a stepping stone to the Pentagon. "It's a volunteer janitor, Rex," Davenport said, waving a dismissive hand. "An old-timer. Probably has some stories, but let's not lose our minds." Rex leaned forward, his knuckles white on the edge of the colonel's polished desk. He said something, a few short sentences, too quiet for the aide outside the door to hear. Colonel Davenport's confident smirk dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, horrified pallor. He stared at Rex, as if the sergeant major had just told him the sky was falling. The ripple effect was almost immediate. The atmosphere on the base began to change in subtle, unnerving ways. When Elias shuffled past the command building with his broom, Colonel Davenport, who was walking out, froze mid-stride. He actually flattened himself against the wall to let the old man pass, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. The recruits were the most confused. They saw what was happening, but they couldn't comprehend it. They watched as hardened drill instructors, men who seemed to fear nothing, would snap to a rigid brace when the old janitor walked by, only to relax into an awkward slump once he was gone. A young captain, the same one who had impatiently told Elias to hurry it up with the trash cans a few days prior, now jogged ahead of him to hold open the door to the mess hall, stammering, "After you, sir." "Please." Whispers filled the barracks. Was he a secret billionaire? A senator's father? The speculation grew wilder with each passing day. Through it all, Elias Vance remained unchanged. He swept the floors. He polished the brass fixtures. He seemed utterly oblivious to the silent, widening circle of awe that was forming around him. His placid demeanor only amplified the tension. It was like watching a sleeping lion, knowing that at any moment it could wake. The mystery finally boiled over in the officer's mess. Lieutenant K. Jennings, his arrogance curdling into frustration, slammed his tray down on the table where Sergeant Major Rex was sitting alone. "I want to know what's going on. Sergeant Major," he demanded, his voice carrying across the room. "This entire base is walking on eggshells around a janitor. It's absurd. Command is paralyzed. What did you tell the colonel?" Rex looked up, his eyes weary. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last 48 hours. He gestured for the lieutenant to sit. "Lower your voice, son. You're making a fool of yourself." "I want an explanation," Jennings insisted, though he sat down. Rex sighed, the sound of a man tired of guarding a secret too heavy to carry. "You see an old man. You see a janitor. Your eyes work, but you don't see a thing." Rex leaned in, his voice a low growl that commanded attention. "That watch he wears, that coin he carries, they were the uniform of a unit that officially never existed. The Sentinels. In the late 60s, when an operation went so sideways that the agency and the military had to disavow it, they'd send in one man to clean it up. They weren't soldiers. They were ghosts. A ghost story, is that it? Jennings scoffed, though his bravado was faltering. They were troubleshooters, Rex shot back. Sent in alone to prevent wars, to dismantle networks, to do the things no one else could. The official story is that the program was a failure and the entire unit was wiped out in a black ops somewhere in Southeast Asia in the mid-70s. Buried. But the legend always said one of them got out. The first one. The man who wrote their operational doctrine. The one they called Nomad 1. Rex paused, letting the name hang in the air. The man you see sweeping floors single-handedly wrote the book on unconventional warfare that your professors at West Point are still trying to understand. Jennings stared, his arrogance finally cracking. He didn't believe it. Not yet. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The proof arrived the next day from the sky. The distinct, thunderous rhythm of AV-22 Osprey echoed across the base, a sound that always meant a visitor of profound importance. It landed not at the designated VIP helipad, but directly on the grass field next to Rifle Range 7, kicking up a storm of dust. Out stepped a 4-star general, his uniform crisp, his shoulders heavy with responsibility. General Harding, the head of Special Operations Command. He strode across the field with an urgent purpose, ignoring the frantic salute of Colonel Davenport, who had run out to meet him. Harding walked right past the base commander as if he were a piece of furniture and came to a stop on the firing line. He stood before Elias Vance, who was quietly watching a group of recruits practice. The young soldiers looked on, confused. A few smirked, one whispering to his friend, "Looks like old E is finally in real trouble." General Harding did not yell. He did not reprimand. He stood before the stooped janitor and spoke with a tone of the deepest, most profound respect, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Nomad 1, we received your signal." The smirks on the recruits' faces evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed, slack-jawed disbelief. Lieutenant Jennings, who had been observing the drill, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. Harding turned to the assembled soldiers, his voice now booming with authority. "For those of you who are confused, let me be clear. The man standing before you, his service record is sealed above my own pay grade. He is credited with single-handedly preventing 3 separate wars, dismantling 2 international syndicates, and rescuing more high-value assets than any single SEAL team in the last 50 years. The man you have watched sweep these floors designed the very infiltration tactics your instructors are teaching you. And he found them wanting. The power dynamic of the entire base had not just been shattered. It had been vaporized. The old man wasn't a ghost. He was a god." General Harding's gaze was fixed on Elias, the question hanging in the air, heavy and urgent. "Your signal, the Oracle Protocol. It was a fail-safe, a break-glass in case of Armageddon alarm. It hasn't been active in my lifetime. Why now, Elias? Why are you here?" All eyes were on Elias. The frail, shuffling janitor was gone. He stood up straight, the stoop in his shoulders vanishing as if it had been a costume. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, a blade honed by years of command. "I'm not here because of something that happened 50 years ago, General," Elias said, his eyes scanning the faces of the stunned officers. "I'm here because of what happened last Tuesday. The thieves think they stole a data file. They're wrong." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Oracle isn't a file full of data. She's a person. Oh, no, a cryptographer working on next-generation security for the agency." He looked directly at Harding, his expression hardening. "And she's my granddaughter. She didn't just let them take her. She had a message for me inside the breach itself. A list of names." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. This wasn't about old history. This was active. "The people who took her aren't in some enemy state halfway across the world, General," Elias continued, his voice dropping to a cold, hard tone. "They're here." Just as he finished speaking, a sudden, violent movement broke the stunned silence. Lieutenant Jennings, the arrogant young officer who had mocked Elias, drew his sidearm with terrifying speed. But he didn't aim it at Elias. He aimed it directly at General Harding, grabbing the general's shoulder and pulling him close as a shield. "He's right, General," Jennings snarled, his face a mask of fanaticism. "The lock is here, and you just lost the key. Simultaneously, a thunderous explosion rocked the base. A column of black smoke climbing into the sky from the direction of the ammunition depot. The theoretical threat had just become brutally, physically real. Chaos erupted. But in the heart of the storm, Elias Vance was an island of perfect calm. From a hidden, reinforced pocket inside a janitor's overalls, he produced a compact suppressed pistol and a small, flesh-colored radio earpiece, fitting it into his ear with a practiced motion. Nomad 1 is active. He spoke into a tiny microphone on his collar. Protocol Chimera is in effect. His transformation was absolute and terrifying. He darted toward the nearest recruit, frozen in fear, and snatched the M4 rifle from his hands. "Your stance is too wide, son. You'll get tired," he barked, reflexively correcting the recruit's posture even as hostile rounds began to snap through the air. Jennings and 2 other soldiers, now revealed as traitors, were laying down suppressive fire. Jennings was using the 4-star general as a human shield, peering around his side to fire. It was an impossible shot. Elias dropped to one knee, the rifle an extension of his own body. He took a single, measured breath. Steady heart, steady hand. A single sharp crack echoed from his M4, but the round didn't fly toward Jennings. It streaked downrange and struck a small, heavy metal wind chime used for auditory training at the 100-meter line. Clang. The bullet, a 5.56 millimeters round, ricocheted at a precise, calculated angle. It was a 1 in a billion shot, a geometric miracle of violence. The deflected round zipped back across the range and slammed into Jennings's firing hand, shattering the pistol and the bones holding it. Jennings screamed, a raw sound of pain and disbelief, and collapsed. The other 2 traitors, stunned by the impossible display, froze for a fatal second. It was all the opening Sergeant Major Rex and the other loyal soldiers needed. The immediate threat was over. With the firefight ended, Elias strode over to the whimpering Lieutenant Jennings, grabbed a handful of his uniform, and hauled him to his feet. The explosion at the depot was a diversion, Elias stated, his voice cold iron. A distraction for the main event. My granddaughter. Her transport was routed through there. You were moving her for final extraction. Where is she? Jennings, his face a mess of terror and pain, looked past Elias, his eyes pointing toward a concrete maintenance hatch set into the ground near the edge of the range. Service tunnel, he gasped. Under the base to the old airfield on the north side. They're moving her right now, Elias said to Rex, his eyes already tracing the path in his mind. We have to cut them off. Elias and Rex, leading a small team of seasoned soldiers, descended into the dark, musty service tunnels. It was a forgotten labyrinth, but not to Elias. He moved through the darkness with an unnerving confidence, using his encyclopedic knowledge of the base's old architecture to outmaneuver the extraction team. In a swift, silent confrontation in the echoing dark, they were neutralized. His granddaughter, Anya, shaken but unharmed, was safe. Back on the surface, under the blue sky, the base was secure. General Harding approached Elias, who now stood with his arm around the young woman he had just rescued. Elias, Harding began, his voice thick with emotion. The country owes you a debt it can never repay. Again, Elias didn't look at the general. He didn't look at the captured traitors or the grateful soldiers. He just looked out toward the horizon, his gaze distant, analytical. This was just one cell, General. The network that did this is still out there. He patted his granddaughter's arm gently. And the list she gave me is very long. The legend of the janitor was over, but the mission of the Nomad had just begun. If you believe true heroes walk among us, often unseen, subscribe to our channel. Share this story to honor their silent courage. Every hero deserves respect. So please, comment with respect and tell us what you think of Elias's impossible shot.